Everyone, and welcome to the February 8th work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, where we will listen today from presentations from staff with respect to the fiscal year 22-23 budget, general fund, community services, fire, police, and 15th District Court. We will, as a group, listen to the presentations. If you have questions along the way, please make note of them so that they can be addressed on the flip side at the end of the conversation, if indeed there is time. Otherwise, I'm sure staff would be delighted to answer your questions as they receive them. Mr. Crawford, do you have the con?
Thank you, Mayor. I will share a presentation with you, which is attached to the agenda packet. Can you see that, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. So tonight's presentation is the beginning of the process for us to talk about the fiscal 22 and 23 budget. And for those of you who have not been through this before, our fiscal year starts this coming July. And every other year we do a 2-year planning process. This is the year where we'll do both years. So tonight's discussion is really about the budget starting this July, going for a year, and then projections for the following year after that. We will review, I'll give a brief overview of the general fund and what things look like, and then we'll go through what we call impacts, which is where staff has taken the existing operations that we have and the projections to continue those in the future. And if something needs to change, we give you a service impact, and then those will each be described. And I'll walk you through, I'll describe in more detail when I go through the city administrator's area so you understand that format, but everyone will be following the same structure. As the mayor said, today's discussion is really oriented around the general fund. So that's the police, fire, community services, and the courts, or the administrative activities. After tonight, we'll follow up with additional work sessions. On the 22nd, we'll cover the retirement system and Ann Arbor Housing Commission. On the March 8th, we will cover public services, which is a lot of area to cover, and the city's attorney's office. March 22nd, we'll do the DDA and the Smart Zone. By the end of March, you will have heard, and I will have heard all the conversation and questions that people have had. And by the end of March, I try to formulate the city's administrator's recommended budget. That is prepared and provided to you as a council as an introductory item on April 19th. It's typically a fairly short presentation because much of the material has been covered, and it's really highlighting the actual recommendations. And then you'll get a significant document that goes with it with all the details. From the 19th then, the public, having heard all of this discussion between now and then, the public has an opportunity to weigh in on May 3rd, where we have public hearings on the budget and any fees or revenues increases that we have that require a public hearing. Those are all done on May 3rd. And then lastly, on May 17th, council actually considers adoption of the budget, where you have an opportunity to amend it and ultimately adopt what you would like implemented for the year starting in July. So jumping into the general fund, I want to start out by just covering a few of the basic assumptions. So on the revenue side, you recall that the general fund is primarily supported by property taxes. The property tax assumptions that we have are that they will go up by about 2.6% in both 22 and 23. Now that's composed of the inflation rate, which has been running around 2%, maybe a little less, and some assumed construction activity. In addition to that, the next largest source of revenue is what we call state shared revenues, which is based on sales taxes. And we have assumed that is flat for each year for a number of reasons. One of which is you have a policy that if it does grow, that will help generate some revenues for non-recurring uses in the future. But it also is reflective of the fact that the state has to approve part of that revenue, and we're never quite sure what the state's going to approve. The other major component is money that the city receives from parking, downtown parking. Now, some of that comes from the DDA and some of it comes from parking tickets. And as you know, during the pandemic, both of those have been severely impacted. Our projections for the 22 fiscal year is a 27% reduction in that revenue. And in 2023, we've assumed a modest increase from there. Some increase, but a modest increase from there. When you roll all that together, our revenue for the general fund is projected to go down a little less than 1% in 22, and then go up about 2.8% in 23. Now, when we look at a budget, we compare our revenues with what our expenditures are. And our expenditures for forecasting purposes have the following assumptions. So we have forecasted the operations that we have to continue forward. And what that means is we have taken our labor contracts and an assumption for wage increases for everyone and rolled that forward for each of the 2 years. We've also, you may recall that for this fiscal year, one way that we save money was to reduce the amount of contributions, what we called supplemental contributions, or amount of retirement contributions over and above the minimum. We reduced those completely to help save money this year. When we do our projections for fiscal 22 and 23, we restore those levels of contributions. Because in fact, as we were making them, we felt like they were minimums, it still needed to go higher. So our baseline assumption is to return back to those policy levels. We also forecasted the healthcare cost increases, and we returned for asset replacements, which you may recall, like setting aside reserves to replace the roof, to repair the building, these kinds of things. We had suspended that contribution as well. And in fiscal 22 and 23, our baseline assumption assumes restoring that $400,000 contribution. And lastly, there's a fire grant, fire protection grant that we get from the state that had $1 million supplement to it. We consider that a one-time item, and we have assumed that has come in, and that goes back out to support the fire station replacement plan. So those are the assumptions that we have. And as you can imagine, you'll see in a moment that continuing our operations forward with these assumptions, and we compare that with our revenues, we're going to have a deficit. So before I leave this slide, though, I did want to highlight for you because some of the revenue challenges that the city has. Those who have been involved with government for quite some time know that in Michigan, there is a set of laws that make local government revenues challenging to be sustainable in the long term. One of those is Headley. The Headley rollback takes your property tax millage rate and reduces it in certain years so that the maximum you can levy goes down when there's growth above established rates. So in other words, in the city charter, if you open it up and read it, you'll see that we have 3 millages that fund the general fund: the general operating millage, a transportation millage, which is really how we support the triple ATA or the ride, and a retirement benefit millage. Those millages were approved by the voters at 12.5 mils many years ago. The effect of Headley has reduced the maximum they can be levied to 9.7. I just want to highlight that as just an example of one of the constraints that we have on revenue. The effect of this of Headley is that it reduces the ability to the cap when you have weakness, but it does not allow you to pop back up when you have growth. So one of the key slides that I want to share with you is this one. And for those of you who are attuned to numbers, this will be easy, but I will take just a minute on this to explain how the general fund outlook, how we look at it. So I'm going to focus on the box, which is the fiscal year 22. On the left-hand side, we have recurring revenues and recurring expenditures as the first few rows. And then we look at one-time revenues and one-time expenditures as the following rows. That's really important because we seek to balance our recurring revenues versus expenditures and balance our one-time revenues and expenditures. This is important for what we call a structural balance to a budget. So when we did our initial projections of fiscal 22, they showed a recurring deficit of $1.2 million. That is not uncommon given that every year we seem to have a deficit because of the fact our expenditures tend to go up in that 2 to 3% range, and our revenues might go from 1.5% to 2.5%. So we usually get a small structural deficit that occurs. We then move forward, if you go to the next column, to economics. And this is moving forward with our forecasted assumptions on what's happened. So this is where some of the COVID stuff comes in and other economic assumptions. Those are all rolled into that column. Where at a bottom line, we have a loss of $3 million, or a use of fund balance that would be needed of $3 million. So to address that, we then went to staff and said, okay, let's take a look at our existing services, which I'm going to call our core services for this presentation, and let's take out 5%. And let's see what those ideas would be. And you're going to hear about those ideas as we go through this presentation. And if all of those ideas were possible and implementable, that would generate about $3.4 million. And that would cover our deficit that we had. However, along with the request to cut the 5%, staff also had the ability to say, if they need something to enhance the services or sustain the services they have, they also had the flexibility to also ask for funds. And when they did that, that was $1.2 million. That's the bottom line there. And then lastly, I've tried to integrate into this presentation, as has staff, the strategic plan that we discussed back in December. And I realized that was a draft plan that has not yet been adopted by council, but I thought it was useful to demonstrate how that can interface with the budget and help drive the discussion. So the column, that next column says, ask staff, if we want to achieve these goals in the strategic plan, what resources would you need in order to that have not already been allocated in order to achieve the goals? And you'll see in that column a very significant amount of money of $4.1 million. Most of that, as you'll see, comes from some new actions, but we will walk through that in the presentation. So lastly, if we were to do, if we could take all the savings that were brought up and thought about and provide all the resources that were requested, we would have a deficit of $4 million. If you roll that through our fund balance that we have in the general fund, and we typically look at something called the unassigned fund balance, because that fund balance represents the amount that is really not restricted in any way. Our fund balance would drop from its present 19% down to 15% at the end of 22 and 9% at the end of 23. Our guideline for our fund balance is 15 to 20%. So how do we deal with that? Well, when we get projections like this with a deficit, this year we tried a new budgeting philosophy on top of the normal efforts that we normally do. And this was called priority-based budgeting. So staff went through a number of exercises in order to come up with ideas, and we look cross-departmentally. In other words, the managers who are always in their business come up with ideas in our normal process. This process solicited ideas throughout the organization. We can comment on other people's areas. That has pros and cons. It gives you a different perspective, but it also generates ideas that may or may not be practical to be implemented. So anyway, going through this idea, the purpose of this is really threefold. First, you want to identify areas of savings, areas that you can really become more efficient. Secondly, if there are opportunities to reallocate costs from one priority to another, we look for those. And if you can't solve your problem through efficiencies or reallocation, then you look at new revenues. So when we went through this process, there were about 48 ideas that we had over 100 ideas to start with, but as they got vetted, we resulted in 48 ideas for reducing costs or improving services. Those ideas were provided to each of the service area administrators to consider as they formulated the impacts that you're going to see in this presentation. As you've seen in the financial slide, we're in a position where the financial needs of the city exceed the resources that we have. The other part of developing the budget is I try to integrate the strategic plan. So this slide just reminds you, the draft strategic plan had 6 goals, and I've listed them here. Our objectives had defined SMART measures attached to them. And so as we go through the presentation, you'll see impact sheets broken into 2 kinds of impacts. There will be a set of green slides that involve impacts for the strategic plan, and a set of blue slides that reflect what it would take if we took 5% out of the organization. Now, the 5% are not recommendations, are not really the recommendations that the service area administrators would completely agree to or recommend. And you will hear them describe how they feel about their recommendations as we go through it. However, it is important for you to understand what we would have to do in order to take 5% out and have the least impact to services. So the first impact I'm going to go through is really our smallest department, which is mayor and council. And in order to take funds out of this area, there's really not much here to do. The mayor has what we call the mayoral coins. A positive number here means we need to expend money, and a negative number means we would save money. And we are about to use up the supply of these coins, which he uses in his official capacity. So an impact would be to reestablish that supply. And then secondly, you may remember that you each have $500 for conference, travel, and training. Each council member does. In order to take money out, this is an item that we could have as an impact in order to take to remove the $5,500 for each of the council members in your area. Now, as I go to the city administrators area, I'll take you through the format in more detail that we have. I remind you the city administrators area includes the communications, the HR, city clerk, safety, sustainability, and innovations, which we've actually pulled out and is really considered a separate unit at the end of the presentation, and fleet and facilities. So I mentioned the green slides. These are some of there are a couple of slides here about the strategic objectives that would fall to the city administrator's office to be the lead on. A number of these objectives, I've updated the time frame to reflect a 2-year horizon rather than the 1. So you'll see, for example, in the draft that you had earlier, 2022 is when we do our biannual resident survey. We would have those results. However, all the other objectives, where practical, were moved to 2023, reflecting that our 2-year plan is for 22 and 23. The objectives that the city administrators area would include having an Arbor be a place that's recommended to others to live at 90% or higher, developing a strategic plan for DEI, increasing the diversity of businesses operating in the community, and establishing response standards for our citywide customer service. There's a few more here. We would internally, we'd also have a workplace that had 0 deaths and recordable injuries. We would implement plans for career development and a fair compensation programs with benchmarks. Going back to the biannual survey, we'd also have 60% of our residents indicate they have overall confidence in the government. And while that may seem low to you, that is the highest among all levels of government. So we thought it was important to keep that in front of everyone. And lastly, it would be to have a recurring expenditures versus revenues. So those are the strategic objectives. Now, from my perspective, I believe we can pursue all of those objectives with the existing resources that we have. Much of the work to achieve those would be focusing on those objectives as we do our work. The only thing that we would request resources for would be for the National Citizen Survey, and that is the survey that we call the biannual citizen survey, and that is done every other year. And so we'd look for $30,000 in fiscal 22. Leaving the strategic plan, then I want to talk to you about the core services. The core services has a similar type format, but it will be in blue for each of the departments. I'm not going to cover this in any detail, but our core services has measures as well. Our core services measures tend to be what is our efficiency, what is our output, how many things are we doing. There are things that we are required to do for our business typically. And the ones that are listed in the presentation is really just a sample of the many that we have. So jumping to the impacts for the to the existing operations, in order to get the 5% out, the city administrator's office would have to reduce its lobbying services contract from $48,000, which we presently have with GCSI. We would ask them to reduce that to $5,000. Recognizing that we are making cuts everywhere, this is something that we'd still seek to have some services from, but we would ask for an accommodation on the contract while we struggle through this financial environment. We would also reduce the budgeted amount that we have available for the annual council workshops. We've had some facilitation funding set aside, and we would reduce that, as well as some funds for governmental services, which are activities we've used to support other maybe public meetings and things like that throughout the year. In this Zoom environment, this is something that we thought we could take out. For the city clerk's office, they've assumed a $35,000 increase in revenue. And what you'll see is a negative here, because that is like an expense reduction basically for us if we increase revenue. So from a net basis, it does the same thing. So increases in revenues or decreases in expenses are negatives. And on the right-hand side, by the way, I should mention, you'll see an R if it's recurring or an O if it's one time. Remember, we talked about that earlier in that summary slide, and that's really important. The other thing the clerk's office would do would reduce its incidentals and supplies for the A2 Citizens Academy, which we've renamed to A2 Community Academy. Now, this actually comes with some hesitation, just because this academy has proved quite rewarding for staff and the residents that go through it. And there's a bit of a bonding that goes through that when they go through that class, and that comes with materials and supplies and maybe some treats and stuff like that. But we would take that stuff out, which is reflective of where we are in a Zoom environment. But I don't know that we'd be that way through the whole year, but we would have to remove those. We would still have the program, but without some of those other materials. E-comment is something that you have on your agenda. Those comments, we instituted that. We pay for that extra service. We could revisit the effectiveness of that and whether you're really getting the usefulness that we had hoped from that. And removing that is something we could do for about $2,800 savings. And then the elections we don't have in 22, so we could take out some monies there. Moving to fleet and facilities, we have, there was a little bit of temp pay that we have. We don't have many people that on staff full-time that help us with our repairs and maintenance. Actually taking the temp pay out has an impact for the ability for staff to keep up with the issues that arise. We would also could reduce our professional services and contracted services by $84,000 for any internal renovations that we do. There's always something going on in our facilities, not just City Hall, but other ones. Presently, we handle those through, if they're general fund related, we handle them through this account centrally. What we could do is just eliminate that contract or budget and have each department do that individually. It's less efficient, but it is something we consider doing if we needed to. Now there's a series of positive numbers here, meaning these are actions, one-time actions that are requests for service. The City Hall's HVAC system is very old, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it has pneumatic controls, some of which have broken, and it's a constant airflow type system. It's inefficient, and it creates an uncomfortable environment to work in. This idea actually came through our PBB exercise, where staff said that this ought to be something that we fix. The system, if I remember correctly, is 60 years old or something, but it's quite inefficient. The air duct cleaning, we're not sure the air ducts in City Hall have ever been cleaned. To be honest, it's certainly been decades. And in an environment when we were dealing with COVID, and you may recall that people were updating their air handling systems. We were looking at this saying we really ought to do this. So this was put on as a request as well. The exterior shell of the building is composed mainly of glass at City Hall. There was a concept that was developed when the Court Police Building the Justice Center was built, where the top floor, which is the largest floor plate, would perhaps drop down, or there would be some other measure in order to take this 40s, 50s, or 60s technology for the exterior walls and actually insulate them. There's not really insulation there, and the windows are not of modern quality at all. And lastly, the Fire Station 1 alarm system is 40 years old, and it is got parts that are failing as well, and is something that needs to be replaced. So we certainly run things for their useful life and pass them here at the city when it comes to a facility perspective. For the human resources area, we would look at actually transferring some of the expenses related to benefits over to our risk fund, where we consolidate all of our benefit costs. And for the safety unit, we would right size the travel and training budget compared to what they've been spending. So those are those blue sheets were the impacts that we would have in the city administrator area. And we would, and those represent the requests and the reductions that we could do to hit the targets that were mentioned. The last slide for this area is horizon issues. What does each area see when they look forward? These are some of the challenges that we're going to be facing as we move forward. For the city administrator area, it's going to be dealing with this post-COVID environment and what that means operationally. We don't think that's going to be smooth and easy, but we're already in the throes of that, but that is kind of one significant challenge we have. Thinking about economic development, it's not something we've got a lot of resources behind, but it is something that as we look at coming out of this pandemic, that needs greater focus. And we also, in this environment with a lot of stimulus funds and a lot of policy issues that are changing, legislative and lobbying efforts are going to be really important to success as we move forward. Developing a strategic plan for the DEI, we mentioned. Succession planning is something from a leadership perspective that we need to continue to keep our eye on and implement at the appropriate time. And then lastly, moving the city's strategic plan, the draft, forward to some kind of adoption by council. And those are the issues that I wanted to highlight from the city administrators area. We'll start going through other areas of the general fund now. I'm going to ask Mr. Horning to join the room. I will continue to operate the slides, Matt, if you would like to tell me when to move forward.
Matt should be joining us in just a second.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mr. Crawford, how are you?
Good.
So I'm going to take you through the financial and administrative services section here. And right here, we've got our organizational chart, and you can see it's comprised of accounting, procurement, assessing, finance and budget, information technology, treasury, and risk management. And my section here will go through all of those except for IT, which we presented just after my section. So here we've got the finance strategic objectives. First, that the city is being prudently managed, and second, that we deliver exceptional core services. And a few of those things that we measure are GO bond rating of AA+, and that our recurring revenues and expenditures are balanced. And then by 22, we want to publish an annual report that goes over all of our core services. For our strategic objectives, we are not asking for any additional incremental resources to achieve those. And here we've got our core services for finance. So prudence and sustainable financial standards. We look to our audit to make sure we have zero material weaknesses and zero significant deficiencies. And as the audit committee is aware, we met those two with respect to the city's consolidated annual financial statements. We did have a significant deficiency in our single audit, which relates to federal budgeting, but it was related to a late payment to us from another governmental unit. Again, we look to keep our exceptional bond ratings at AA+ for the city and for sewer, and we're at AA for water. We want to align our resources, again, that we have no structural deficit, that our fund balance is within policy. Right now, we're a little bit above that. And we want to make sure that our pension and VEBA trusts are funded appropriately. With those, our goal is to have 100% funding. We are at 84 and 67% respectively. But I'll point out that those are exceptional in relation to our peer cities. We want to make sure we have a sustainable and strong finance team. At this point, we are fully staffed, which is the first time I can remember that in quite some time. And we do have succession planning in place. We want to make sure that there's equitable economic development. And as council knows, we just adopted our new poverty exemption guidelines. And we're working with IT and with Spark and the LDFA to construct high-speed fiber optic in the city. And then we want to do transformative initiatives, and PBB is one of those. And you saw a presentation on PBB a couple weeks ago at our work session. So these are impacts to achieve core services within finance. The first four there are just incremental reductions in various line items like legal fees, materials, supplies, and things like that. And then the last one, in order to meet that 5% target, is a potential layoff or retirement. If we got a retirement in a timely way, we could avoid a layoff, but without retirement, we would have to look to laying off an employee, and that position has not yet been identified. Aside from the finance side, we have what's called non-departmental, and these are things that are citywide but are housed within the general fund. And the first three items there are similarly various incremental reductions to a few line items. And then the final one, there's the big one. We can eliminate or reduce our transfer to our capital sinking fund, which takes care of capital improvements at general fund owned facilities. And finally, we've got our horizon issues, and these will look somewhat similar to Mr. Crawford's. We want to make sure that we have succession planning, training, and organizational development implemented. We want to make sure that our PBB process is integrated seamlessly into our budgeting process for the city. We want to make sure that we maintain the health and sustainability of our pension and our VEBA. Obviously, support the development of sustainability initiatives within the city. And most challenging is navigating financial challenges of COVID-19 and looking to do so for post-pandemic realities as well.
Thank you. And Matt, and next, Jackie, we have in council, we have Tom Suchuk, who is the city's IT director.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, and Mr. Crawford. For information technology, our strategic objective is really universal access and information to communications technology. We've been working very hard since 2017, building our own fiber network, and currently working under an LDFA grant to do a technology park in downtown Ann Arbor. But our goal is really to get a good communications infrastructure in place so our community, so the city and the community can take advantage of technology. As far as the impacts to that strategy, at this time, we are not asking for any incremental resources. But as our fiber and our communications network expands and is deployed, and we do have customers that are on it, so we do offer it as a service these days, it is going to continue to grow. And in the future, we are going to need, project management and administration to be able to manage the excess capacity and the and the customers that we bring on to the communications network.
Ms. Suchak, I'm just going to mention that when you say customers, we're referring to typically institutional or corporate customers, not individuals.
Yeah. So, sorry. Okay, as far as our core services go, the first two, our applications delivery team and our enterprise support team, what they do is they support all of our business units and our line of business applications. And we do, and what we do is we have a project methodology where we deploy projects. Every time we do a project, we use the methodology. And as a result of the project, we do a closure survey to, number one, make sure that we're meeting the business needs of each one of the projects, and then the overall customer satisfaction of the project to make sure that we're hitting the target when we do those projects. On the help desk, under the help desk, we also do an annual customer satisfaction survey, and our goal is to make sure that it's over 90% satisfied and very satisfied with the organization. And then from infrastructure services, which is our data center, all of our servers and our computer systems, our goal is to keep them up 96% of the time. And our network services, which connects all of our locations together, our goal is to have that up 95% of the time. And really the goal is to make sure that technology is available to all of you all the time. And as far as our impacts go for the IT department, we do have a number of intern positions that we use, and they help us deploy computers. They help us administer our network. There's $76,000 of savings there if we didn't use those positions. Reducing training for the IT staff, I will say that training for IT is very, very important. Technology is very complex these days, and it's very, very fast paced. And this is a 50% reduction in our training for the IT department. We were doing some conference room upgrades before COVID, and we could eliminate some of those upgrades now because we really don't know what things are going to look like after COVID is over. And then our biggest line item here is really two full-time employees. And the layoff or the elimination of those employees. And if that happens, our level of service will definitely go down between the interns and 2 FTEs. We don't deploy less technology these days. We deploy more technology. So it would take it would have an impact on the level of service that you're provided today and our response times if we were to if the changes to our FTEs would occur. And then there's also some other small projects or softwares or utilities that we could eliminate. We would be a little bit less secure as an organization, but the total comes up to our 5% cuts is about $500,000. So that's everything that we're looking at today. So, and as far as our horizon issues, cybersecurity is very, very challenging. We spend a lot of time. We actually spend a lot of more money on cybersecurity than we ever have in the past to keep our network safe. The future workplace, telecommuting, COVID, we don't really know what the new normal is going to be once we come out of this. But technology, you have seen that the technology that we have in place today allows people to work remotely, and it allows us to be flexible. And so when we come out of COVID, it's kind of difficult to tell what things are going to look like as an organization from an IT perspective. And then the last two, the digital transformation is really kind of tied to smart cities, and that is everything's connected these days. And the reason that we're building these, a community network and a really strong, robust foundation, communications foundation, is to make sure that we can use technology and we can connect people, and we can connect buildings, and we can connect devices out in the field that allow us to remotely manage and operate things that will result in efficiencies and cost savings. And then also, so we can capture data from the systems that are out there, so we can use that to make good business decisions. Again, to make sure that we become more efficient and to save more and save money.
Thank you, Mr. Suchek. Next, we want to go into our safety services area, which includes both fire and police. And the first we have is Chief Kennedy for fire.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mike Kennedy, Fire Chief. Pleasure to be here this evening. So to start off with, for the strategic objectives, the big one we have for fire is trying to replace Station 4, which is in the southeast side of the city. And our goal with this is actually for this to be the first net zero fire station in the state of Michigan. Nationally, there's 2, both of which are in Salt Lake City, and this obviously ties very closely with the A20 initiative. And the station needs to be replaced, and we can also achieve some pretty phenomenal sustainability results while we're at it. So the goal for that is 2025. As Mr. Crawford mentioned earlier in the evening, our finance projections include this $1 million from the state of Michigan for the fire protection grant funding. And this is since the city of Ann Arbor covers the property of state-owned property, which is the University of Michigan. This program has been in place for several decades. They previously only funded this at a very small fraction of what it was supposed to be. And we're going into the second year where we're projected for it to be fully funded. So some positive news on that, but that $1 million is rolled into our projection. These are some kind of core services. Similar, won't spend a lot of time on these tonight. One of the big ones up on the top is our 6-minute citywide emergency response time. So this is from us being alerted, turnout times and travel. And we are hitting this metric right now, and that's really a key for us for that first unit on scene citywide, less than 6 minutes. So for our impacts, this is for the 5%. I will say the fire department is already quite lean. We've had a lot of reductions over the last really 20 years. And compared to both state of Michigan and even kind of some national cities, we're on the lower side of FTE per 1,000 population. I believe our current staffing allows for us to deliver excellent fire services. We're at the point that if we have additional reduction in FTE, there's not a whole lot we can do to not have decrease in service. The top line is something that we had anticipated. So this was actually before the request for the 5%. In fiscal 21, we were budgeted for 4 fire inspectors. This would reduce that to 3. I feel very comfortable that we can handle that reduction to 3. Line 2 is the reduction of yet another fire inspector. So this would put us at 1 fire marshal, and I should have backed up. We have a fire marshal and then 4 inspectors. The top line takes that to 3 inspectors. The second line takes that to 2 inspectors. We would have a really hard time maintaining our inspection rotation and frequency. So the length between inspections would decrease pretty significantly if we lost that second position, which we would go down from 3 inspectors to 2. On the third line, this year we were hoping to hire a fire recruit. We had literally started that process this time last year, and then COVID hit, so we put that on hold. And the idea of the fire recruit position is something that I've borrowed from the police department and also other fire departments across the country. For about the last 20 years, the Ann Arbor Fire Department, we've only hired firefighters with experience. The city saves an awful lot of money with this, and it's about a year for somebody to get hired and then fully trained. We don't have the capacity to do a fire academy and EMT class in-house. We don't hire that many people to justify that expense. The only two departments in the Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Detroit are really the only three departments in the state that are doing that, but they hire 10, 20 firefighters at a time. We just don't have that type of turnover. And what we're finding is the firefighters that are graduating from fire academies, there's not a lot of diversity. So by us only hiring people with training, we're automatically at a deficit of trying to recruit either a better gender or racial diversity for our department. The police department had a lot of success with this, so we can, I'm not being bashful, but the police had a lot of success, and we're just trying to copy what they did. So if we were to lose that recruit position, that really would go kind of as a deficit to some of our DEI initiatives. We have some vacant firefighter positions. Right now we have 72 firefighters assigned to our suppression. And with that 72, there's 24 assigned at 3 shifts. So 2 of those shifts, we would drop down to 23. This would affect the amount of firefighters available daily. We would maintain our minimum staffing, but what we would likely see is a direct increase in overtime. So this is one that by reducing those FTE count, if we want to maintain our daily staffing, we're going to see an increase in overtime just for sick, workers' comp. We have to have more firefighters in our daily staffing or our daily minimum. And so we could do this, but again, the fallout would be likely increase in overtime. The the 5th line down, this is using some allocation, some one-time allocation of that money from that fire protection grant to cover operational expenses for fiscal 22. And then the final line on there, I'll get to with our horizon issues. Our Rescue 11 is the unit of the city. It's based out of Station 1. It's our highest response vehicle in the entire city, and that's due for replacement, and we want to do an enhancement when we replace that. So next slide, please. So for Rescue 11, the picture on the left-hand side is the current vehicle, and it's on a pull-out tray. This vehicle was kind of a concept when we first initiated it, and it's worked out incredibly well. We operate 2 suppression companies out of Station 1 downtown. And again, this vehicle does 1,600 calls by itself every year. And it's been a tremendous asset to us. But on a night like tonight, where it's snowing out or any sort of rain, or the fire we had last night at Miller, all of the equipment is on that pull-out tray. So snow gets on it, it gets wet. It's one of those that kind of sounded like a good idea at the time, but in hindsight, not so much. The vehicle on the right is what we'd like to go to. It's still a light response utility vehicle. The city of Kentwood, just east of Grand Rapids, put that in service this fall for basically an identical service of what we're trying to do in Ann Arbor, so a light response EMS vehicle, but it has much better compartmentation on it. Unfortunately, that jump is a big one. So it's $110,000. It's a one-time cost. This is not adding any vehicles to the fleet, so our total fleet number stays the same. It's just giving our firefighters a much more functional vehicle, and our equipment isn't being exposed to the elements as it currently is. So, and then on a larger horizon issue, so this is for fiscal 23. So for the fire department, we have 2 reserve engines. Our reserves are both 16 years old, and they have over 100,000 miles on it. 100,000 miles for a fire truck is an awful lot of miles, and 16 years for a busy urban department like Ann Arbor is really kind of end of life for reliability for fire engines. Both these vehicles pass their Department of Transportation inspections. The Wheeler Group does a phenomenal job of doing maintenance on them. Our firefighters do a great job of keeping them up. They're tired vehicles, and the current fleet replacement schedule doesn't show these being replaced until fiscal 27. And I should back up with our reserves. Basically, once a week, one, if not both of these vehicles goes into frontline service. So anytime one of our normal frontline rigs goes out for maintenance, there's a mechanical issue with it, and any sort of issue, these vehicles go to frontline. So they're a reserve, but so last week, one of them was in service the entire week. And just it kind of depends on maintenance and other sorts of breakdowns. These reserves ensure that we don't have to close stations because of mechanical issues. So we're not increasing that, similar to the rescue, we're not increasing the number of vehicles. What we want to do is we just want to pull ahead the replacement of these to fiscal 23. So we would purchase newer rigs, or some of our current fleet would move to reserve status, and it would just give us a more reliable reserve fleet. And the concern is that if one of these has a catastrophic breakdown, we could end up having to throw a lot of money at a vehicle that's already at end of life. So this is a horizon issue. And again, it's not asking for any real additional funding. It's just pulling that funding ahead from the current schedule. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Kennedy. Council, the fire department is the second largest department financially in the general fund, and the largest is the police department. Jackie, if you could bring Chief Cox over, that'd be great.
He should already be here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Good evening, everyone. So as far as the strategic plan is concerned, we are in line with certainly trying to keep a safe, engaged, and vibrant community by having our objective be to make sure that everyone feels safe within their neighborhood and the broader community in general. We'll be measuring that by a safety survey of hopefully getting 93% resident appreciation and approval rating by the year 2022. You can go to the next slide, please. Our two biggest impacts that we're currently asking for are investment into community policing and potentially a pilot program for maybe a mental health response model. The amounts are to be determined because of the fact that there's an input from certainly the residents that we have to get regarding community policing. This past year regarding COVID really impacted our ability to get out and do all the things that we needed to do to make sure that we are mindful of everything that in all the neighborhoods as far as what they need and how they want to be policed in the certain locations. So it's impacted our ability to say for sure as we transition over from the older model of policing that we were doing before to more of a community policing model. So that's still yet to be determined because we are impacted still by COVID, and the fact is that we don't get to actually talk to residents in person like we did. Next slide, please. Our core services are fairly simple. Community engagement, which really is about building trust with all the residents that live in the community by having positive exchanges and interactions with them to find out what it is that they like and prefer as far as policing is concerned, or more importantly, what they need to feel safe within their community and how we can partner to help solve some of those issues. And obviously another city service that we provide is an administrative services around visibility and really transparency, or whether it's through our website that we'd like to improve or social media issues. And the one area that in policing in general we really struggle with is transparency through data and making sure that we put out data appropriately to show what it is we do and why we do it and how we do it. That is something that we're looking to hopefully enhance and improve as well. The patrol function really comes in two flavors. That's the traditional response to 911 where you call and we go for service. And the other part of it, particularly around community policing, is really the visibility of patrol and being there to deter crime in general, just by visibility and being at the right place to maybe deter folks from doing bad things. And the last element of what we do that could potentially be impacted is our criminal investigations with detectives and the services that we provide. Obviously, clearance of crimes are a big priority of what they do, but they do quite a bit in general to help businesses and residents actually not be victims of crime in the first place. So we would love to reduce crime and particularly violent crime in general going forward with these core services. You can go to the next slide. All right, the impact that, in going through this 5% reduction exercise, some of the savings that we found were the mere fact that we have retirements. We get a significant savings as people retire. I want to put out that within the next 3 years, we can have over 40 people retire, which is almost a third of our police department. And within the next 3 years, they can actually go and retire. I'm not saying that they all will, but they can actually do it. That is a pretty big number, very difficult to replace, and the impact on that could be pretty severe. Overtime reduction. This past year is really not a good example because a lot of the events were canceled. Football was canceled, but we're trying to stay level funded based on what we were funded for overtime in the past. And although, we don't know what the future holds, the idea is hopefully, we won't need to do additional overtime as a result. But that could come back to bite us in some ways because depending on our size, and if we go, too low, we'll have to make up overtime just for sick time purposes, FMLA purposes, overtime in general to make up just for shortages, if that were to be an issue in the future. We obviously can save some from some of the reductions in fees around some of the transcription services that we have. And then we did find a fair amount of savings in our fleet elimination of a couple of vehicles in the detectives unit and the savings we get from that. But obviously the largest portion of the funds that we would need to meet this 5% reduction would come from personnel. And that would be at least 11 full-time officers in the amount of, over $1 million in savings. That's what that would occur. Now, of course, the impact with that could be several, depending on the priorities at the time. Obviously, with input from the public and what is going on, we would probably reduce some of the services we provide in specialized units, maybe a traffic unit by eliminating that and maybe incorporating them in the rest of the patrol. That could potentially impact some of the traffic services that we provide, or at least in the amount of it, not in total. Like we would still obviously enforce traffic and do things, and as far as speeding is concerned, but we couldn't do it in the same way. It also could impact the specialized units of around traffic and accidents and in accident reconstruction and things of those natures. So by not having a specialized unit to do that, we would no longer maybe be able to provide those services. Another potential elimination that we have is a police service specialist position that actually it's a civilian based position that actually takes police reports and actually answers the phone at the front desk. By eliminating that, we could get some savings. Ironically, eliminating of that particular position would end up meaning that we might have to take another officer to bring them in as well to do the same service. So it is it's a little bit self-defeating, but that is what we would have to do. Before I go to the ask, I did want to put out and speak very briefly to statistics as far as size of city in Michigan. At least in comparison to 2017 data that we have, Of the 5 or 6 largest cities, or at least cities similar size to Ann Arbor, we are probably, if not the lowest per capita police officer in the region. If we're not the least, we are probably second to least as far as the number of officers assigned per population. Considering the population in Ann Arbor was going up and increasing, that should be something to consider, particularly as we go forward. One of the asks that we put in here for, and I think I did this the last time as well, is given the nature of what's been going on, particularly with the events in the Capitol and just the unrest and the growing group of hate crime that's out there, we wanted to add an explosive detecting canine to the unit to provide some security, particularly to some of the faith-based groups and/or all the special events and things of that nature if they were to come back. Currently, there's a shortage of that within the county in general, and we do have currently canines that are drug-based, but the trend on that is going the opposite, and they're 2 different functions. So that was one of the requests that we wanted to go forward, and that cost really has to do with the purchase of the canine and/or the vehicle that they would have to be transported in with. We put another request we put in for electric bicycles, which are what they are. It certainly goes towards community policing, visibility, and more importantly, it's very good on the environment. But they can also still respond to current 911 calls as well, because the electric officer could still get there relatively quickly without the loss of response time. We have a taser replacement we put in. Our tasers are at the end of life, and unfortunately, they do need to be replaced because they are dying and they are a needed tool, I would say. And then the last thing we put there was about another position, which is really a chief strategy executive added to certainly our command staff for the purposes of really implementing community policing, not from the standpoint of them actually implementing, but on the back end. Part of my job and role is to be out front, certainly to be out there amongst the officers and doing some things around community policing. Unable to do that unless there's someone there who understands and implements and makes sure we're doing quality assurance around monitoring, evaluating, and making sure our strategy is happening in all the places that we need it to happen department-wide as we cross over. This is something that I probably initiated and mentioned a year ago when we first started, and just still bring it back up again, just maybe a little different title. You can go to the next slide. All those together really would get to the amount of the 5% and then add a little bit back to it. Our horizon issues, and I talked a little bit about it, is end of life for taser. They need to be replaced. And the good thing about the new ones are they come with automatic features that really tie right into body camera, where it's when they turn on automatically if anybody would have used them. Community policing needs, talked a little bit about that. That's still an unknown piece as we reach out more to the community in general to see how we would implement it. Cost of electric vehicles in general, that's just a cost that's going up that everyone within the city will have to incur those. And civil unrest, this has been a pretty horrific year in so many different ways, but the combination of the unknown of just unrest in general, and coupled with the fact that there will be, it certainly seems like, a lot of criminal justice reform, and with mandates that are unknown at this current time, and the costs associated with them. I just don't know, but I would imagine there will be several. The ability to recruit during this period is a very difficult time in general. So who knows how that may impact us, but hope it hasn't so far, which is a very good thing. I mentioned officer wellness. Very, very important in the sense that this has been a pretty tumultuous year in general, but it's something that it really needs to be addressed, and we probably need to do something proactively for the men and women to do the job in general, just to make sure that they're okay in general. I think it pays dividends, not just for officers, but for anyone in general. So you add all those up, and then we have our emerging crime trends where throughout the country right now, crime trends are going the way up. Violent crime has spiked significantly throughout the country, virtually everywhere, and including here in Ann Arbor, in a sense to it. So as far as aggravated assaults are concerned. So our trends are not going in the right direction, but again, hopefully as we get through COVID, that changes. So next slide, if we have any. Yep. And that's it. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Just a second, I'll reset this. Thank you, Chief. We're gonna now move to Mr. Delacourt to do the community services service area.
Mr. Delacourt should be joining us in just a second.
All right, I think I'm here. Takes longer to go from being outside the room and up to here than it did to walk up to the dais in the old setup, or up to the podium. Nothing like having to follow the two guys in uniform. I think Tom does this to me every year. We are community services. I think everybody knows who we are. For the most part, we do everything parks and recreation, planning and zoning, building and rental. Our community development involvement works or leans towards working with Washtenaw County on health and human services issues, affordable housing issues. We also partner extensively with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission on their projects and try to assist them wherever we can. Next slide. Tom, you're supposed to just guess when I need it changed. Parks and Rec, our biggest department money-wise, split about 60-40 between the general fund and the Parks millage. Our strategic objectives is one that Parks hits pretty much every year, and that's to maintain a high-quality recreational and fitness opportunities and a 94% positive rating. They set the bar pretty high when it comes to that. And then I think the bigger thing, I think all of you at this point, at one time or the other, have heard me talk about it. That's the need to make sure that our capital assets, that goes for everything from our physical structures, rinks, swimming pools, cobblestone, everything else, to all the suites, playgrounds, pathways, everything else that go to make up 165, I believe, parks, 64 parks and over 2,000 acres at this point. So making sure that we have the funds necessary to maintain that capital investment is super important to us. Next slide. Parks and Rec impacts to achieve strategic objective. We really only have one that hits on us, and it's something we've worked towards a lot. It's a one-time cost that we're looking at. We've done a lot of internal work to inventory what we have as far as capital assets. But at some point, we need to have a defined and implementable plan to replace those assets before they become more expensive to maintain than they are to replace. We don't have that right now. $250,000 is a large price tag. I don't expect us to have to spend that much. I'm hoping we don't. We are seeking better numbers, and hopefully by the time the budget is actually considered, we'll have a more well-rounded or a well-thought-through number. But for now, we're putting this in here as a placeholder because we've looked at similar cities and talked to some of the engineering firms that do these type of analysis. For similar type cities, this is not that far out of reach for a plan of this type when you include implementation. Next slide. Core service. I'm not going to read through all of these, but these performance measures are ones we track quarterly, just like every other department. Make sure well, it's an example of them. We track many more, but these go to touch on some of the different service areas we have or services we provide within Parks and Recreation and how we track whether we're doing a good job or not, and that the city's money is spent well or not. Next slide. This is what you've all been seeing tonight. I think you're aware of the 5% task. This is a combination, and I'm not going to go through them all individually, of fee adjustments and reallocation of funds between minor fee increases, moving of staff time and cost between the general fund and the millage, depending on continual refinement from our parks manager on how they do their business. And then there is some increases in here as well that are just due to operational issues. Next slide. Same thing here. These are almost exclusively fee increases. They amount to, I don't think we've increased any of these fees since pre-2015. All of these amount to rather small adjustments in total cost. Percentage-wise, they probably vary or average right around 10%. But this is in combination with moving some of the money and reducing what we spend on tree pruning, how we're proposing to get to right now, I think it's about 460,000 in cuts in the general fund to make the 5%. So we took a look. These are all, most of these truthfully are fees that we would probably been coming back with the fee schedule regardless, because it's time to make those adjustments. We don't adjust every year like a lot of places do. We don't do 2% or 2.5% a year. We tend to do it every 5 to 10 years and do it in slightly larger chunks. But on average, these average out to below probably what would be a market adjustments if we were to do it year by year. So we're not proposing to cut staff in Parks and Rec at this point, but this is a continual impact to our budget. We're squeezing things tighter and tighter. It lessens our ability to do more with these funds as these adjustments are made when they're sucked up by the need to reduce our general fund expenditures. Next slide. Parks Horizons issues. Yeah, COVID-19 has thrown a giant monkey wrench, obviously, into parks and everything we do there, and we're still learning how to adapt. Our staff was incredibly adaptable last year and flexible with our operations, and we're able to stay on curve or ahead of the curve as far as what the governor's office did. And I expect them to do the same this summer. We're hoping to bring day camps and some more of the facilities back online, but that's going to be as protocols and as guidelines dictate process as we go into the spring and summer here. The biggest one, again, I can't beat this drum hard enough, is aging infrastructure. You know, a lot of the parks facilities, a lot of the buildings, a lot of the things that go into making everything run were built around the same time, and they're all becoming, 30 plus years old. Similar to infrastructure, similar to water sewer, there's a bubble in the park system when it comes to capital. We need to identify what those needs are and start to set money aside ahead of time, so we're not chasing our tail when it gets to replacing those. And then I think everybody in parks is similar, really wants to be a leader in DEI from a departmental level and understand what they're trying to do at that scale. Next slide. Building and rental. Building and rental, if everybody remembers, the orientation is split between the construction fund, where most of the building, trade, permit, and inspection operation goes. But rental housing, which we do have a sizable rental market in the city of Ann Arbor, specifically due to the university. And then a lot of our administrative things still come out of the general fund. Our strategic objectives are similar to other departments, and that's to maintain 90% or higher ratings of satisfaction amongst residents and others who use our services. Next slide. We had no real strategic objectives that applied directly to building and rental, so we'll just go right on through. Core services, these are across both general and construction fund, but most of what we do in the building department, everything depends on how fast we can turn a permit and how fast we can get out and do an inspection. So a lot of these are you can see our goal is always to be able to have someone, if you want an inspection done, is to be able to schedule that and have that done within 20 to 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours. What we find, if it takes any longer than that, people move on with their projects. They may tend not to schedule the inspection and hope to get by without if we slow their project down longer than that. And that decreases the safety across the city. Plus, it decreases people's desire to make investments in their properties if they're constantly waiting on the city. And rental properties, the big one is first-time pass. For us, that's a great indication that what our expectations are clear to our customers, and that our inspectors know what they're looking for in the field. When we come out to do a rental inspector, people should know what we're there to see. They should be able to anticipate that. We should be able to deliver that in a clear way. And then they should be able to have those properties prepared so we don't have to come back out twice. That helps them and that helps us. The more firsts we do, I think it's better for the city. If we're going back out to just double check that work's been done, that doesn't serve a purpose for anybody. Next slide. We were able to achieve significant reductions in our general fund costs. This is well above really the building department's 5%. We try to do this from a community service area overall, is how the budget works. This helps us not be able to make cuts in other places like coordinated funding, potentially what we partner with on the county. We did that. We have aggressively tracked over the last 5 years where our staff spends their time in real allocations opposed to just estimates between between the construction fund and the general fund. So we are able to make some continued tweaking to that. One of the more difficult things we've dealt with over the last year does have some positive repercussion. There will be a registration fee associated with short-term rental, we anticipate. This is an extraordinarily conservative estimate. This would estimate about 1,000 short-term rental units at $100 a piece, would be about $1,000. The barricades reduction is due to the fact that the city's getting out of the barricade business altogether and allowing special events to use private firms to do those, which is a benefit to both sides. And then there's a small additional ticket administration fee. We don't get any of the money from tickets that we deal with as far as zoning or building, and we spend quite a bit of time on the administrative side. So we're going to add an administrative fee to those. That's something we've been talking about doing for a long time. Next slide. Horizon issues. There is nothing larger than we are replacing Trackit and eTrackit with InterGov software, which is a massive undertaking for the city. We do tens of thousands of permits and inspections and payments a year through that software. Not to mention other departments use it for plan review. Planning uses it, engineering uses it. This is really an enterprise software. It is ingrained throughout the organization. We are about 2/3 of the way through the replacement of that. We expect to see significant efficiencies and improvements in customer service from it. The software we use now has really stopped being serviced or upgraded for years, and is a patchwork system that we've band-aided together to stay afloat. But we expect this to be hopefully transformational. But as we know, any software installation has its issues at time. And the next two, or at least the next one, is really piggybacked on that. It should increase our abilities to do work from the field significantly. It's designed to be a workflow driven process as opposed to each step having to be manually manipulated. So we're hoping it allows us to automate a ton of our processes. So it can make a big difference. And then something that's been on our plate for years, it's probably been on this slide for a couple of years, is to go to a more universally understood property maintenance code. Goes back to our first time inspection understanding. Right now we have a housing code that works differently than almost any other cities. Most cities use what is a nationally or state adopted IPMC or International Property Maintenance Code that's updated similar to the building code on regular cycles at the state level, with only minor adjustments needing to be made at the local level. So we will not be such a one-off when it comes to how we do rental inspections and how we pursue property maintenance issues. Next slide. Planning. The big objective and measure is the master land use plan. I don't think that's any secret. We had started down that road before, sidetracked towards the end of the contract process, and then COVID hit, and it's been set aside since. I think we understand from everybody involved that that has to be back on the table at some level over the next couple of years. Next slide. Instead of biting it off all at one chunk to start with, one of the things that became readily apparent as we tried to work through a contract for the master land use plan was a really difficult conversation the community as a whole was having surrounding single family zoning. And a lot of misconceptions, a lot of predeterminations of what the city should or shouldn't do, was or was not going to do when it came to single family zoning. And conversations internally and what we watched play out locally and in the city of Ann Arbor, we thought one of the things that may help move the master land use plan process forward was to first have and we're calling it a community conversation, whether you want to call it proactive public outreach, community engagement, whatever you want to call it. We need to figure out a way to have that conversation, I think, to satisfy and take the edge out of everybody's nerves when it comes to how the master land use plan will look at single family zoning as a land use. And I think that starts with some common ground on the history of single family zoning, what we think as staff regarding single family zoning and where it needs to go. We need to hear from our boards and commissions. We need to hear from neighborhood groups. We need to make sure everybody feels heard and comfortable that there is no desire to drastically alter everything that happens here in the city of Ann Arbor through the master land use plan. We are concerned that that will be a impediment to us getting off to an honest discussion on the master plan. So we are proposing, and I think this is the first time a lot of folks have heard it, is to actually partner. We're putting some professional services money aside to have that community outreach and engagement on single family zoning and maybe some other master land use plan issues. But before we actually start down that road to do the master plan, because we feel what comes out of that will be good information for whoever and however we do that plan. That was a very long explanation about one line cost. Next slide. Core services. I think most of you have seen these before, but these are similar to the other departments. These are our performance measures that we track on a regular basis. Next slide. Impacts. Again, this is the representative. We try to keep impacts, or if there's going to be cuts, we try to keep them on the recurring side. The big one here, I'm not going to go through each one, but the big one here is we have squeezed the planning department is all general fund and is almost all staff. Through previous cuts, we've trimmed it down to almost just staff and nothing else. There's been no money for a lot of different projects. We are proposing to restructure, start the department starting this year. We have 5 planners. What we're looking at is through some process of reallocation of those positions, going to 2 associate planner positions and 3 planner positions. These would be slightly lower level positions. There is a significant cost savings. What we didn't want to do was just drop an FTE to make that cut. What this also does for us is we are very heavy in the planning department, and similar to what others talk about, is we are almost specifically project focused. We are almost always reactionary. We are almost always spend all of our time reviewing projects, writing staff reports, and spend very little time proactively reevaluating the plans and the core documents on what we do, not just the master plan, but even our ordinances and other things. This would allow some redistribution of how we do planning. It may have an impact on the project review in that we have less resources available for that, and we may be moving more resources to other things. We hope the moving all of our site plan review and commenting through our new software to an electronic based system instead of paper is going to increase capacity for us. We're not sure of this, but we can no longer squeeze those cuts just out of paper and travel and other things. So this is an attempt at us to try to continue to provide a high level of service, maybe a little bit of refocused service, but without a straight reduction in FTEs. And then the other ones are just a reallocation of resources, some into professional services to allow some flexibility for projects. Every year we've gone back and looked, council has wanted us to partner to do some kind of special project that's required outside resources. Instead of planning and trying to budget those every time they come up, it's our idea to put some money in professional services to allow that to happen as those projects come up, instead of zeroing out those line items every year. Next slide. Horizon issues, master plan for sure. You'll see we talk about this, the zoning, land use, and racial equity. I think that goes to a little bit of the conversations we want to have, and some that have been out in the community for a long time. And I think we believe it's probably time for staff to engage in those formally. We've been on the edge of them for a long time, and we've heard a lot of people tell us what we think, and it's probably time we get involved with the community and participate in those conversations, if not lead some of them. And then affordability and sustainability, I think we know those two issues, and rightfully so, are driving a lot, if not the primary issues driving almost everything we do right now, or at least the umbrella in which we look at them under. And then restructuring, we just talked about that a little bit when we were looking at the line items. Next slide. Community development. This is one that I think feeds into the DEI stuff we've been talking about, and that is we know we are a segregated community. We're a segregated county. This is an opportunity to work with or look to work with maybe the county and some outside agencies of exactly how and what we can do to increase the diversity. In Ann Arbor to start, but in the region as a whole. Next slide. And then again, this is, we don't have any formal costing for that, but what we do know is I would be stunned if it didn't require some outside expertise that we don't have on staff to develop that plan. I don't know that yet. This is at its infancy, but we thought it was good to put a dollar amount associated with it, because like anything else, to meet a strategic objective, rarely is there not a cost involved. To say with the additional slides or with the previous slides you've just seen, where we're reducing capacity internally to take on additional responsibility with strategic objectives while reducing internal capacity, something has to give at some point. So for us, that means this is why we are talking about using outside professional services. They allow us the one-time increase in capacity project-based, without having to maintain the ongoing capacity internal to take these all on. So that's what this would be. And then community development. When we talk about community development, a lot of that is our partnership with Washtenaw County on coordinated funding. I think everybody's aware that coordinated funding has and is changing. It is evolving. We think that's a good thing. And we are going to be having, I think, what would amount to some very significant conversations starting in the spring here about what coordinated funding, or whatever it's going to be called, is going to look like going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Delacourt. And next, council, we have Cheryl Sanborn and Judge Valvo available to talk about the 15th District Court.
They should be joining us momentarily. Tom, they've both been promoted to panelists.
I'm unable to assist because of my screen sharing. Are they muted? If
I've
we're-
asked Cheryl to unmute herself.
Okay.
Sorry, where did we leave off?
Oh, there you go.
All right. Did you hear any of the service?
We didn't hear anything. If actually, if you could start from the top, we
Okay. Well,
welcome Ms. Simward.
That's terrible. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. The court is in place to provide the community with an impartial, safe, and accessible forum for the just resolution of public and private disputes. We have 4 service areas. We have administration, which is responsible for the oversight of non-judicial functions of the court. Some of the things we do are personnel, budget oversight, grant oversight, purchasing, responding to a FOIA request, handling requests for foreign language interpreters, and facilitating ADA accommodations. The second area is comprised of the judges and their direct support staff. They are responsible for creating the official record of court proceedings, maintaining decorum in the courtrooms, and resolving cases in a timely manner while ensuring rule of law and protection of individual rights. The third area is case processing. This is our customer service hub. That's where the clerical staff reside. They perform essential functions such as the creation, maintenance, and destruction of court files, scheduling court hearings, sending notices to parties, and accepting payments. And last but not least, the probation department, which is responsible for pre-sentence investigations and reports, supervising and counseling clients to ensure compliance with court orders, and referrals to outside agencies for services. Next slide, please. Some of our performance measures include we want to attain 100% compliance with the State Court Administrative Office reporting requirements. This is aimed at administration. For case processing, we want 97% or greater accuracy in payment processing. For the judges, we chose each year we have an annual public satisfaction survey. And of course, I can say each year except for 2020 due to COVID. Within that survey, question number 3 is the way the case was handled was fair. So when we say this, we mean we want people to feel that they had a fair hearing. Our goal is to have respondents agree with this statement at a higher rate than, or a higher rate or an equal rate to the statewide average. We want, for probation, we have 2 measures listed. Greater than 75% of probation clients successfully completing probation. And we also want our sobriety court graduates recidivism rates for any conviction to be less than or equal to the statewide rate for sobriety court graduates. Next slide, thank you. We're not asking for any additional resources. As far as expenditures, the largest expenditures in the court's budget are related to personnel and IT. Potential impacts that could occur to achieve a 5% reduction in the court's expense budget would certainly impact personnel. So looking at the slide, we have potential elimination of budgeted equipment allowance. We have a reduction in conference training and travel. The next one, reduction in contracted services with Washtenaw County. This one I want to give a little more information on. This would actually require a reduction in our public service hours, proposing 8 hours per week. We would have staff here. The savings would be gained by not having the weapons screening officers in the lobby performing their duties. This solution was chosen over furlough days as the court receives a large number of civil no-fault case filings, and a reduction in staff hours would result in an increase in the case entry backlog. Currently, we're about 2 weeks behind in the civil case entry because staff have been working more overtime. On average, though, this can be up to 6 weeks. So regarding this proposed idea, the reduction of our public service hours would have to be approved by the State Court Administrative Office for us to move forward with it. The next item, maintain FTE vacancy for 3 months in fiscal year 22. This would be impactful as this is part of succession planning for my position. Of course, delaying filling this position just reduces the amount of time someone would have available to them to learn the aspects of what I do. The next item is potential reduction of bailiffs' work hours by 5 hours per week. These would be hours they are not in the courtroom. It would be somewhat impactful as the bailiffs do help with the clerical work when they are not in the courtroom. Right. We have a potential reduction in temporary pay. We may end up making up for that later in overtime. The next item, reduce professional services. This one is related to the MIDC, which is the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. So locally, we receive reimbursement for some of the costs related to indigent defense through MIDC grants. And so we are required to have, to meet a local share amount that is in the court's budget. Amounts above the local share are being reduced in the professional services line. So the only thing I would say, if the MIDC grant funds are not approved or they become unavailable in the future, the court would request at that time additional funding for indigent defense, as the court's required by law to provide legal counsel for indigent defendants when potential sanctions upon conviction include incarceration. Next slide, please. Actually, Tom, can you move back? I think I might have gone a little too quickly there. Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Reduction in materials and supplies, $2,000. Reduction of overtime, also $2,000. And the potential elimination of a position and the associated costs for $109,000, essentially. All right, next slide, please. Horizon issues. All right, so the first one is changes in Michigan Indigent Defense Standards. So standards 1 through 4 were approved by the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs in May of 2017. These standards cover training and education of counsel, the initial client interview, use of investigators and experts, and counsel at first appearance and other critical stages. Standard 5, which requires independence from the judiciary, was just approved in October of 2020. There are additional standards out there that are pending approval. They include defender workload limitations, qualification and review of attorneys accepting assignments in adult criminal cases, attorney compensation, and a standard for determining indigency and contribution. The second item, trial court funding. The Trial Court Funding Commission was created to review Michigan's trial court funding system and make recommendations to improve its effectiveness, including any changes to the methods by which courts impose and allocate fines and costs. The commission's recommendations were published in the Trial Court Funding Committee report dated 9/6 of 2019. The strongest support was from stakeholders who want a partially unified system, wherein the state and the State Court Administrative Office would provide services, e-filing, document management and technology, while the local communities would retain operational control. There was no update available from the State Court Administrative on, oh my goodness, I gotta slow down. There was no update available from the State Court Administrative Office on this initiative. The Information I received from our regional administrator was that they believe this has stalled for the moment due to COVID, but we'll hear more about it in the near future. All right. The next item, e-filing. This State Court Administrative Office also has an initiative to help courts use technology to increase efficiency and improve access through a rollout of a statewide e-filing and electronic document management system. When this initiative began, courts were assigned to waves. Previously, we were assigned to wave 6, which is near the end. However, the State Court Administrative Office recently asked courts to complete a survey to help reprioritize courts who are awaiting implementation. This reprioritization may result in our court being able to move on to the statewide system sooner, which would be super helpful with our civil caseload and also helpful in the COVID times. All right. The last one, impacts of the Michigan criminal justice reform legislation. So there were several bills put forth that were enacted. The legislative changes become effective on multiple dates in 2021. The impacts that these new laws will have in the court's caseload and budget will be hard to determine until they are effective and in place for a period of time. The State Court Administrative Office is working to provide us with additional clarifications and directives related to these changes. And maybe once we've received this information, we'll be able to quantify the impacts a little better, but at this time, I would just say they're indeterminate. A couple of examples of the changes are reclassification of certain traffic offenses from misdemeanors to civil infractions. A specific example would be driving while license suspended. Potential positives would be civil infractions typically take less time for staff to process, and time to resolution for those for civil infractions is generally shorter than it is for misdemeanors. A potential negative, if you're talking budget, is that the allowable fines, costs, and fees for civil infractions are generally lower than those allowed on misdemeanor cases. A second example of the criminal justice reform legislation is the clean slate bills, which are scheduled to go into effect in April. These impact the rules and procedures an individual may use to have prior convictions set aside. Changes were made to the existing paper application and the eligible offenses, and the bills also create a new automatic process for those that are eligible to have them set aside without an application.
Thank you, Ms. Sanborn. I think unless you have anything else, I think we're going to move to Office Sustainability.
All set, thank you.
Now we have Dr. Stoltz here for, this is our last department for the evening. We're running a little bit long, but I have asked Dr. Stoltz to cover her material appropriately. Dr. Stoltz?
Thank you, Administrator Crawford, Mayor, and council members. I have the dubious honor of being the caboose tonight. Thank you all for your great patience as we work through this topic. I am going to try to be succinct for you, and I'm going to focus more on high level. Of course, you have the slides. So as my colleagues have done previously, in terms of the strategic objectives, OSI holds 11 of them, and they range, I won't read them here, they range from everything from our diversity work, especially our equity and diversity work out in the community, and of course, objectives related to A20, whether that's clean energy, which you can see on this slide, and the absolute goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. On this slide, you see our metrics around resilience and our electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We work with transportation on other elements of A20 that relate to other parts of transportation. And excitingly, our new 10,000 Trees initiative is here as well. Go to the next slide. This kind of rounds out those 11 metrics. There's more here around the disclosure and the information that we're generating in terms of how our infrastructure is performing. The second is about how we move around in our community, making sure it's easier to walk and bike and generally be out on the street, interacting with people in a more kind of human-centric design. And then below, you can see things around transit in and out of the community, as well as really helping our industry invest more in the green jobs, the sustainable jobs that we want to be an innovator and receive, but help promote and push out to the market. So these are from the strategic plan. What's different here from the strategic plan is with A20, we have an ask. And the way we started our budget is a little bit different. We started from the investment scenario that was presented with A20, and we moved backwards. So we looked at that investment scenario and we started to also make cuts across the board and say, what can we sacrifice in the next year or two and still achieve the goal of 2030. It may mean we have to front end or we'll back end and we'll have to invest in later years, but we still have a chance of reaching that objective. So what you see here for the strategic objective of A20 is really a budget increase. And so kind of highlighting some of the larger items on here, just to flag them, we are looking at bringing more staff on, getting up to that staffing level. I want to point out one of the staff in here is actually in partnership with facilities. You heard my colleagues tonight talk a lot about capital infrastructure. One of the things we're concerned about is we look across the organization, if we're not investing in the sinking fund, if we're not investing in proactively maintaining our infrastructure, well, we're putting a lot of sustainability features, a lot of really good, high quality comfort and safety features in our buildings, which are critical, but we're not proactively maintaining them because we don't have the staff to do that. So if we're not going to have the resources to replace them, it's even more critical that we have the staff capacity to maintain them and to operate them and get as much useful life out of them. So that's the proposal here, as well as we've leveraged temporary staff in OSI to get programs up and running. There's a threat that we'll lose a lot of that institutional knowledge when those people leave because we can't move them into full-time roles. So the proposal here is to take the staff that have been working with us, really building the programs, demonstrated a really high performance level, and roll them into the team. We also are asking for a bridge in funding until we get our vehicle replacement rates updated to reflect the higher upfront cost of electric vehicles, but the lower operational costs of those vehicles, specifically for heavy equipment. So we've been working with Public Works to identify vehicles that are up for replacement, primarily things like refuse trucks, which would be very exciting if we could bring them on, but there is a delta there. And so we're proposing just covering the delta until, again, those replacement rates are fully institutionalized. The big ticket item, of course, is the one at the very bottom, and this is fundamentally about making the physical improvements in our community, whether that is through the installation of public EV charging infrastructure, which in fact is the big ticket item here. There also is investment in city facilities to do the efficiency upgrades that are desperately necessary. We've just completed audits on a number of facilities, so we have a line item list of proposed improvements. And then the electrification. As we're taking out a boiler, where can we replace that with a heat pump? And again, as you heard, our capital sinking fund doesn't necessarily have all of the resources necessary to make these improvements. So this is helping ensure that when we do make those replacements, we're not doing a Band-Aid, we're actually investing in the kind of infrastructure that helps align with the goals we've set. Next slide, please. As we go to the core services, none of this will surprise you, right? OSI holds A20. We work on efficiency. We work in the community broadly, whether that's through engagement or helping our community make more sustainably centered investments. And of course, we hold resilience at our core, both the resilience of our natural systems, of our people, and as our community as a whole. So these are the metrics that we track on a quarterly basis. Next slide, please. So when you look at the general fund, for us, historically, our general fund dollars are small. We don't have a lot. So a 5% cut for us is about $33,000. So we're proposing a cut in professional services and a reduction in the dues and licenses that we have, the softwares that help us do some of the accounting that we do. We're going to try to bring some of that in-house. We are, however, asking for an increase in legal fees as our work is getting more and more complicated. You have heard us talk before about the need for some outside legal counsel, some really specialist counsel to help us navigate some of the really exciting, but also a little sticky things that are coming in our future. Next slide. So to close this out, you are really at the end. In terms of the horizon issues we face, we've grouped them into 3 categories. The first, of course, is financial and seeking and actually getting the investment to do A20. My colleagues tonight did a phenomenal job talking about the intersection many times, and I don't know if you caught it, whether that was the fire chief talking about the net zero energy fire station or Mr. Delacourt talking about how sustainability is being thought through in the master plan process, but really continuing to work collaboratively to institutionalize this work so OSI can be more on the front end of the spear, the tip of the spear, if you will. And then, of course, helping our residents do this is really critical as well. The second is capacity. That's across the board. That's securing, training, managing, maintaining the human capacity that we need internally and externally to achieve a 2.0. And the last is exciting in many fronts, and that is getting the federal legislative support that we need and the state legislative support we need to be able to do the work that's possible. You know, just recently, we have seen a slew of opportunities emerge, and we're really trying to stay on top of that and understand how we can leverage that work. Also tell our legislators about the things that we need them to be paying attention to. And then, of course, partnerships with our utilities are key, as well as the other major institutions in our community, how we're working collaboratively where there are opportunities to coordinate more effectively with folks like the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor Public Schools, and of course, the RIDE, and many others. So we have a number of really exciting issues, opportunities on the horizon, and some potential speed bumps that we're looking out for. So with that, I think, Mr. Crawford, back to you.
Thank you. Mayor, we have provided you a lot of information tonight, and there are some years when we're able to, it takes less time, and years like this when it has taken more. I guess I did want to share with you that I know council will have questions. This material will be available by video as our other meetings are. If you have questions, please follow up and send them as you normally would to Ms. Higgins, myself, Mr. Horning, and Ms. Busselmeyers. We will provide responses to you in writing. We will post those on the city's website that we have for the fiscal 22 budget development. And as we go through this process over the next couple of months, those will remain out there so everyone has access to the Q&As. That is all we have tonight, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crawford. And thank you truly to staff members, one and all, for a lot of information reflecting a lot of work and a lot of creative work and a lot of sober work. We, of course, provide services, both basic and exemplary, to folks in the community all the time, and none of it's free. And, with COVID, hurting all of us in different ways, but as a municipal organization, hurting us on the funding side, this is an opportunity for us to think deeply and carefully about what we do, how we do it, and how we fund it. So again, and truly, thank you all. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. To speak at public comment general time, please enter the number on your screen. That is 877-853-5247. 877-853-5247. Once you're connected, please enter meeting ID 942-1273-2148. 942-1273-2148. Once you are connected, please enter *9 to indicate that you wish to speak. When it is your turn to speak, our clerk will identify you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. Our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
Mayor, I don't see any members of the public in the queue at this point.
In light of our delay, I'll wait a little while longer. Seeing no one, public comment is closed. We have a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Council Member Iyer, second by Councilmember Dish. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.